Welcome to the Kind Leader Podcast, where empathy meets action in the world of leadership. Your host, Gino Degregori, engages with innovators and seasoned professionals from diverse sectors, all demonstrating the power of leading with kindness. And now, your host, Gino Degregori.
Welcome to the Kind Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Gino Degregori. Today we have the honor of welcoming Danny Stoian to our podcast. Danny is a director at the U.S. Department of State with a career spanning over 2 decades in various pivotal roles across the private and public sector. And most importantly, he's a kind leader. So happy to have Danny here with us. And like I said earlier, you're the first government employee to participate in this podcast. So I'm really looking forward to it. So with that, could you please share with our audience a bit about yourself and your background, please?
Sure. Yeah, my career has been mostly about kind of chasing the next thrill and the next thing that's been interesting to me. So I started off out of school. I joined one of these big consulting firms and was told I was going to travel the world and see all sorts of industries, and started off in Silicon Valley, and there was so much business there that I started off with a bank merger and then got introduced to high tech and big tech companies, and then thought, oh man, I want to get into this more. And so I joined, I did the startup world for a little bit, and then 9/11 hit, and I thought, man, I want to be involved in affecting other people's perception of America and our relationship with the world. And so I became a diplomat, worked in the Middle East and Africa mostly. And then in the process, I've stayed involved in the private sector, been involved in some NGOs, on the boards of some NGOs, got involved in academia a bit. So I just have a lot of different experiences to hopefully help people learn from the mistakes I've made along the way.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your background, and I'm very honored to have you here. So one of the questions that I always ask the guests here, the first one is, what does being a kind leader mean to you?
Well, I feel like your podcast has helped me evolve what my thoughts of a kind leader are. So I thought, initially I thought a kind leader is kind of avoiding, I haven't had terrible bosses, but definitely trying to avoid, man, I don't want to ever be that person that's like blaming people, yelling at people, just not being a jerk is essentially how I define what a kind leader is. And I'll give you an example of, I was in the Middle East working at our embassy there, and we had a going away party for someone who had worked at the embassy for several years, and most of the embassy was together having a really good time. Like, the work is really intense, really important, consequential, and we were just kind of letting loose. It was great. Mm-hmm. And somebody at one point came up to me and said, hey, that guy over there he's been drinking too much. You should probably get involved, right? I was the most senior person at the time. And I thought, okay, let me, listen, I don't need to lord over everybody and tell them, even outside of work, that I'm the boss. I went to him and I said, hey, can I give you a ride home? Do you need anything? And he's there with his wife and his kids. And I thought, okay, I don't want to embarrass him. I don't want to make him look bad. And he said, no, I got this. And so I said, okay, I'm going to go around back to it. I thought, okay, well, being a kind leader though, I'm going to leave the party because, I know I want to have fun here, but I'm going to drive behind him and make sure he gets home. And as we get on the highway, we're going, I'm feeling really good about, man, I'm a kind leader. I really took his in consideration and didn't want to embarrass him. Yeah. And as he starts swerving on the highway, it made me realize, what in the world was I thinking? What was I going to do driving behind him? How was I going to help out? And as he rides the rail, sparks are flying everywhere, getting the exit. He, does a 360 in the sand. His kids jump out of the car as if it's like a scene from a movie. The cars are going to explode. And I look at him and he could barely open his eyes. And I thought, oh man, that was a bad call. That wasn't being kind. Right. I was really I had a superficial notion of what being kind was, but as opposed to really thinking of what is necessary in this moment for this person? What's the best thing? Not are they going to like it? Are they going to be happy with me? But what do they really need? Right. And I think that's what I try to go back to, even though I get that assessment wrong a lot. It's trying to figure out, what does that person really need and how do I take care of them? Yeah,
that's a beautiful story, and thank you for sharing. And I think it's spot on to some of the discussions that I've had in the past as well, and actually most recently yesterday with my team as well. It's more it's not just about being nice. When in your scenario, you thought, okay, I'm being nice, I'm taking care, I'm not making them look bad, right, and that kind of thing, but the accountability. And for that individual that now he has no way to truly drive and putting his family in danger, and you can still be kind and go to him and be like, hey, this is something that you shouldn't be doing, right? Yeah. Let's figure out a way, let's find a solution in a way so they potentially understand and not put their self in harm or, kind of create something even worse. I'm glad that nothing really bad came out of it, but that's a great story though.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a story that I learned a lot from, and I apply it a lot in thinking about am I doing this for the right reason?
Mm-hmm.
Is that the right definition of kindness here?
Yeah, because people think, when you're kind, you're just a nice guy. And it can't just be you're a nice person, right? It can't just be that. It's really the follow through. And because if you are not putting people accountable or not really highlighting the things that are not happening or you're expecting them to do, there's going to be a challenge. They're going to go their own path. They're going to step on the wrong thing. And they're like, well, I was nice, but you didn't really help them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, listen, I've, in the meantime there, so in my 20 years, I've probably had to let go or move people along. Maybe I'd say more than a handful of people. And so my dream, right, is like at one day, some of those people will come back and say like, listen, I was really annoyed at that time when you told me that this wasn't the right job for me, but now I've landed this great job. This is exactly the profession I want to be doing. I'm thriving now. Like, thank you so much. That hasn't happened yet, but I am hoping, right? We recently had this, I'd say maybe a couple of months ago, we had to let somebody go. And it was kind of under that same pretext of, not approaching it of like, I'm angry you're not getting your job done. I'm angry with your performance.
Right.
But I'm just like, hey, let's figure this out. Like you're not getting the results you want.
Right.
Like you're not getting appreciated by your team, your colleagues, your reviews, your promotions. Like let's find something that really is going to have you hit it out of the park.
Right. And I don't know the situation, but I'm guessing is they're not passionate about the work that's in front of them, right? They're like, oh, I'm just getting a paycheck. I'm just doing my thing. It's like, but you have the control. I mean, shifting the mindset a little into mindset. It's like you have the control to create and do the things that you want to do and the impact that you want to create in this life, right? And I think sometimes people forget. They get into the grind. I'm just doing my thing, and there's nothing wrong doing your thing, but at the same time, do the things that make you happy.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people forget that. And then to your point on the story, it's like, how can we help them as kind leaders navigate through that? Hey, this may not be the right opportunity for you right now, given X, Y, and Z, not seeing the performance or whatever it may be, but maybe you help them find something else that is going to help them in the future.
Well, and that's why I think your podcast and your constant focus on kindness has helped me, right? Because I think that message delivered without kindness doesn't get heard.
Yeah.
Right? And so that person is not hearing it, you're not helping them. But if you have a history of being kind with that person, with people around them, and then you approach that conversation kindly, that person's able to hear you in a way that's different.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then it gives them a real chance to find their passion, to find their thing.
Right. And I talk about in several episodes too about growth mindset and scarcity mindset. And a lot of people, unfortunately, our minds every day, I don't know if there's a statistic out there, I don't know the actual number, but 80% or more are negative thoughts because these thoughts are trying to protect us. And unfortunately, some thoughts that are coming in are not necessarily to protect us and not allowing us to really expand ourselves or take some risk or do the right thing. So what I'm trying to say is having the growth mindset compared to scarcity mindset allows us to be able to see and impact more lives, right? So when we're talking to these people, right, in their mind, they might be like, well, I can't do this. This is what I'm doing, and I can't see myself in another position because this is all I know. But the reality is they need to take a step back and really, we can help those individuals see the path or see the light at the end of the tunnel. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I do think that's the essence of kindness, right? Of really trying to help them, for sure.
It's the caring at the end of the day, really. So it's empathy is really understanding what the other person really is going through.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you don't know or you don't care, you're not going to make that impact. Because I can be like, you know what? I don't care what's going on in his life. I don't care what's going on with his mind or even, physical or whatever. Are you doing the job or not? If you're not, then get out of here.
Yeah.
That is not going to get people to do the things you need them to do.
No, and I think the more that you have like life experience, the more you can appreciate that, right? There's, the older I've gotten, the more I've had colleagues that passed away, colleagues that suffer from serious illness, people going through divorce. You realize like, oh man, the fact that you showed up today, right? That was probably a huge deal. And you just are able to approach that. And so we recently had this. There was somebody who, man, she was dealing with a lot of stuff in her life. Like she was a fabulous performer. She was one of our top performers, doing great work. And for the past year and a half, she just was a different person. And it was very easy for someone to say, you're not performing the way you used to, right? Like we got a lot of stuff going on, like our country, the world is counting on us to address these big, serious issues. Like if you can't do it, for every position we open up, there's 1,000, 1,500 people that are applying. So if this isn't the thing for you, we got it. Recently we found out that like, listen, her daughter was being like molested at school. Her son was having like learning disability issues. The fact that she was still showing up and still caring about the work, she just needed a little bit of time to deal with that. Right now, she's been dealing with that. She's hitting it out of the park again. Can you imagine if we would have let go an employee like that who'd been at the State Department for 15 plus years, knows the institution really well, knows the issues, what she's able to perform? It would have taken us several years to get somebody else up to speed performing the way she is.
Yeah.
And so that's just like, it's also just beyond kindness, like it's just smart business.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No,
Smart
yeah.
business, it affects, in the government, we don't have the bottom line, but I imagine the private sector, right? It affects the bottom line. But for us, it's being able to solve the big problems that government is here to solve.
Yeah, it's the mission, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, and the government is about the mission, especially like the State Department's different facets of what you guys do. But, we do a lot of stuff in the intelligence community, DoD. So it's kind of, from us, is like protecting the war fighters or, protecting, the mission that are happening. So it's really critical how you approach the situation and help that individual. Because to your point, if you guys would have taken the wrong approach, you would have not only lost somebody, but imagine that impact of, in the negative side of that person, not feeling good about themselves, losing the job, now you shifted that mindset from, it's okay, we're humans, right? It's okay, give me an opportunity to fix whatever I need to fix so we can get better.
Yeah.
Right?
Do you know the other thing that I hadn't thought of at the time when we had kind of taken this approach with this employee, but every other employee in the organization, and so my organization, several hundred employees, they all noticed that, right? So they noticed that what our priority, the leadership's priority, was taking care of our people, right? So what we thought is like, look, my job is not the mission, to tell you the truth. My job is to take care of the people, and they're going to take care of the mission.
Exactly.
And if we take care of them, but it like reverberated around for everybody else. It also set the standard kind of for all the line managers to be like, well, if the top brass is handling it this way, then what's our excuse for not doing it this way? And so we just modeled the right way of being. And it really like, there's no one silver bullet or one thing that does everything. But I feel like that type of action really like set the culture in a different direction.
Absolutely. And it's, like you said, it's at the top, starts at the top, leading, right? And you lead with kindness, you lead with empathy, and you show that. And the approach and how you take it may vary, right? But the framework is there, right? At the end of the day, we want to care about our people, want to make sure that they are safe, they have what they need to be successful, and most importantly, they're there to collaborate and support whatever it is that they're doing. Right. So, but it starts at the top in everything.
It definitely does. And this is something I've appreciated you've said a couple of times in these podcasts, right? About like, setting the culture, and does it really make a difference in the leadership? And I'll tell you, so as a diplomat, the first part of my career was overseas across the Middle East and Africa, like I said. But the past couple of years, I've been back in the State Department. I've worked for different secretaries of state, and man, the leader does make a difference. So right now, our Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, he's the consummate diplomat. There's a reason he's our nation's top diplomat. He's just always kind, and it really affects everybody around him, right? It's not, he's not a yeller, he's not a screamer. That doesn't mean that our quality is dropped or that the products that we produce for him and prepare him for meetings is dropped. Right. It's that everybody raises the bar because they don't want to disappoint him, right? Yeah. And and almost like they don't have top cover to be yelling at people because that's not the way he is.
Right.
And that's not the way every Secretary of State that I've seen has been. And it really, like, you definitely see the attitude based on the leader.
Yeah, the paradigm is shifting from that demanding drive, hard-nosed, get things done leadership style to more of like, how can we listen? How can we care? And how can we execute some of the things that we're doing and communicate with the group out there, right? And so you lead by example rather than, there's no need to yell. People are not going to listen. Then the minute you start yelling, it's going to create this fear. I better not say anything because if I say something, I'm going to get my head chopped off, right?
Right. No, absolutely. Absolutely.
So you really stifle any productivity. You stifle some of the stuff. So that it really, when I put this together from a podcast, I wanted to emphasize and create future leaders or even the leaders that are out there to make sure that they are able to feel free that, hey, I can do this. Nothing's going to stop me. And there's other great leaders like yourself out there doing it.
Yeah. And I think, listen, I think it would be great if everybody just appreciated that intrinsic, this is the right thing to do. But it's also, so on the private sector companies that I've been involved with, right, of just being able to show like it affects the bottom line.
Yeah.
Not being kind.
Yeah.
It's like to your point of like somebody has a solution out there that they're stifled. They're not going to raise it in a meeting. Also, people are voting with their feet. So I'm involved in a couple of software companies. So the technical skills that they're requiring, like that's in really high demand. We have a couple of like AI developers, data scientists. If their leadership is not treating them kindly and not leading with kindness, they're going to go somewhere else. The cost of replacing that person is it hurts the bottom line.
Oh, yeah.
And on the other side, on the government side, right, we don't have necessarily a bottom line, but the amount of distraction that's with either a lawsuit, a civil rights action, anything like that is just so distracting from the mission. And again, like I said, with Secretary Blinken, I noticed that the discussions is all about the work, right? And previous secretaries of state, it was a lot about how do we manage this person, right? How do we manage so we don't get yelled at? How do we manage this? And instead of like our focus being on solving problems, our focus is now on how do we manage this person? How do we manage our team that just got yelled at? Oh, somebody's going to go brief him. So now we're going to have another half hour where we like, decompress a little bit. And we're not solving the problems that like the taxpayers are paying for.
Absolutely. That's a great story. And I appreciate you bringing that comparison between the private sector and the public sector, right? And we're all humans at the end of the day, but the culture that these kind of verticals or industries or whatever vary. And even inside those, those different, like you look at kind of federal civilian, DOD and IC, and, it also varies in the culture. But what recommendations you have for leaders out there, especially in the government side, because I'm hearing some great things and you're, the Secretary of State there doing already, but what do you recommend?
I think it's, listening to podcasts like this, right? It's like having conversations like this for people who are struggling is to just find a community of people that can talk you through a lot of this stuff. So we've had kind of these leadership lunches, we call them in my office, where we talk about these things we're struggling with, right? And this answer of like, well, I totally understand theoretically this notion of being kind and putting our people first. And we just had this conversation a couple months ago in the office of saying like, that all makes sense in theory, but when there's a crisis, right? Yeah. So when we have to evacuate our embassy in Sudan, like, I can't be sitting there and saying like, I don't know, Gino, I know it's been a rough day. I know you had an argument at home. I know like the bills are tough. So it's okay if you don't get this work done. Like, no, we got to get these people out, right? Yeah. There's a short window where the C-150 is going to be on the ground. We got to get our people out there. Yeah. So under crisis, under deadlines, how do you do it? And really trying to let people know of like, hey, that's not your responsibility. Right. Like those are the people on the ground, the line workers, they'll figure that out. But your job is to figure out how do you take care of those people? But it's really, and I think just creating an environment where people can talk this through and have those arguments and then like, in their very specific situation, right? So you and I can talk in theory, but it really depends on it. Is it, a consulting project you're on and the deadline? Like what is happening? Right. But I do think part of why we're here as leaders is to help the line managers come up with the solutions. Exactly. How do you always land on kindness, right? So I know you're struggling. Listen, I'd like to say that my go-to is kindness all the time, but I'm a human, right? So there's times where the deadline is driving me, or the mission is driving me, right? Or my own frustration, annoyance is driving me, and figuring out a way like, okay, I know in that moment, man, I just got to call up Gino because Gino's going to set me right. I'm really lucky that I've, in the government, you don't always get to pick your team, but I've been really lucky. I've gotten to pick a couple of people on the leadership team, and I pick people that, will definitely pull me aside and say, hey, Danny, let's go for a walk. I've got an executive assistant who I know when he comes in the room, that means my voice is getting too high, right? And I just know, and like, but people who are like, okay, bring it back. You've told me, Danny, that I've got to hold you accountable to being a servant leader, and I know if he walks in the room, that means I'm not doing my job. Exactly. And so I think that's what we need. We need people around us who will bring us back.
That's beautiful, and I think you talked on different things that I really want to pull a few threads. But we are humans, like you said. We are not constant, right? We're not a constant. Like we're in this kind state the entire time, right? There's going to be a variance, or there's going to be times where we do need to step up a little bit, but there's ways to do it, right? But the big thing that you said is you have to have trust. How do you build that trust? By being open and creating these lunch and learns, or let's get together and just let's build a trust. Let's make the connection at the end of the day, so people know that, hey, you know what? I can be heard. I can trust this person. If there's some problems or things, they'll care and we'll figure it out together, instead of feeling like, oh, I can't bring this up. I can't talk to this person, right? Yeah. And then, like you said, most importantly, to surrounding yourself with people that are not afraid of providing you that candid feedback is critical.
Yeah. It is really critical. And, I just have a deputy actually who started yesterday. Oh, nice. And oh man, this guy is great. He comes in with so much like senior experience in the government. He has lots of ideas of what we want to do, but he's also, part of his brilliance, right, is he said, okay, but I need this first couple of weeks, I just need to meet people. Okay, I don't want to take any action. I don't want to jump into anything. I just want to meet people so they know that I care about them, and it's not just like I'm here to deliver on a mission.
Wow.
And he's doing a great job of that. But it's really tough, right? Because he comes in, he's eager to prove himself, right? He wants to deliver immediately and saying,
Right.
but having that wherewithal and the top cover to say, no, your first job is just get to know everyone, build the trust that you're just talking about. So when you do have to deliver a difficult message and you do have to redirect people, they know it's coming from a good place.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it's that's great. Great insight from this individual to come in and make the connections.
Yeah.
Because if you don't make the connections, they're never going to be able to build a trust or listen to you or whatever, right? Like, I am here to not only help the mission, but like you said earlier too, I'm here to work with my people. The people are very important.
Yeah. I mean, this is we were just talking about being parents, right? So this is a parenting lesson that I try to bring to the rest of my work is like, so I feel like, man, I have like gospel that I give my kids. I have brilliance, right? From like so many years, but it doesn't matter if they're not hearing me, right? So like, it doesn't matter if like the message is so great, if my wisdom is so great, whether it's at home or at the workplace, but if your team is not hearing you and they're not listening, and so the number one step is like, you got to build that trust and you got to build the environment where you can actually be heard.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up some kids. So I got 3 kids on myself, and the biggest thing for me is my wife and I have done an amazing job in creating kind kids. Where it doesn't matter everything else, you just got to be kind, right? You got to make sure you're caring, you're working through it, and right. And one of the things that I also make sure that they know is, no matter what the situation, no matter what's happening to you, that your mom and I are here always. And that's not just trust, but that's also like, we are here to catch you, to support, right? In whatever decision, right? We're here. And obviously we want to guide and support whatever direction, but that is obviously as parents, there's nobody else is going to love their kids more than us parent, right? But at the same time, you need to remind them, because you know that it's there, but you need to let them know. You know, my almost 19-year-old is getting ready to go to college. It's like, look, I know you're going to be 2 hours away or an hour and a half away. Anything you need, just call me. I'll be there. Incredible. I'll drop everything and I'll be there.
That's incredible. You know what it makes me think of? So you were just saying that you're originally from Peru. So our former ambassador to Peru, Ambassador Lisa Kennett. So before she went over to Peru, she was essentially the equivalent of like the chief of staff for the Secretary of State for Mike Pompeo. And Mike Pompeo is known for having moments of wanting to hold people accountable. Let's call it that. And she has this great example. I remember seeing her where he was livid about something. Somebody dropped the ball. Something really bad happened, right? And he said, I want to know. You give me the name of that person. And she says, it's Lisa Kenna, right? That's her name.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, who's the person who did this? And she's like, it's me. Like, if you need to know who to go after, it's me. I'm your chief of staff. Like, the only name you need to know is me. And that thing, the same kind of like philosophy that you had with your kids, is the message she was giving of like, I've got you guys.
Yeah.
I will take care of you. Don't you worry, right? Like, whatever mistake you make, I have got your back. I will take the fall for you. It's just amazing, amazing leadership. And like you said, like, when people like me see her do that, it's like, oh, okay, that's the way to be. That's the model I want to follow.
That's so impactful. You know, it's not, the other way is very transactional, and the way you just described is very transformational, because now you're transforming people's lives and how they view things. I'm like, oh man, if this person does this, now they're going to do it, and they're going to teach others, even their kids, and then now you're creating a generational impact. Yeah. I don't know if you ever heard of that, but it's a generational impact, and it's what we're doing here. So my hope is, with this podcast, we allow people to learn to truly be kind and lead with kindness, but keeping people accountable at the same time, and working together to accomplish anything. Yeah.
Well, it's a concept that is easy to say yes to, but it's really hard to practice. So this is why I really appreciate you continue doing these podcasts, right? Not to put you on the hook, but man, you got to keep on doing these, keep on pumping these out here and like having these conversations, because the more that we can talk about it, the more it's, okay, what does that mean in this situation? How do I apply it? Oh man, I'm struggling in this way. And the more that people do it, like totally to your point of it has this like exponential effect of like more people out there doing it.
Yeah. And you bring a good point too, is sometimes kindness can be described in different ways, or the interpretation on how to execute it can be interpreted different ways, right? And that's even internally that we've had a hard time kind of defining for the past few years. And it's like, what does it mean? Does it mean that you have to be like Gino, like me? Like, no, absolutely not, right? It's you have your own personality as it relates to how you deliver and how you communicate, how you build a trust, but there's a framework around that, right? And I'm working through putting something together that I'll eventually share with the podcast and see if it makes sense for others to start incorporating it in different organizations or institutions or whatever, just to give them a foundation, because people want to know, how can I execute it? Like you just said, the concept is great, but how do I go about the different scenarios, and how can I implement that at the end of the day?
Yeah. Well, whenever you have that, you let me know, because I definitely think I would love to figure out as well, to like, how do we train this to be like, this is a core of smart management, right? Don't put it as like, oh, it's a style that you can consider or not, right? Or do you want to be a kind leader? Do you not, right? Of like, no, this is smart management. You have to do it. And the only thing that's up for discussion is, how do you implement it? Like, what style do you want to do it? Like, what, to your point of like, this is how Gino does it. This is maybe how Danny does it. And like, you got to figure out for yourself what that looks like. But whether to be kind or not, that's no longer up for question, right? You have to do it.
That's exactly it. That's the constant right there, for sure. So having said that, I mean, what do you think the vision, as we're talking about this, what is the vision of leadership for the next few decades, let's say?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? I can't pretend to be that smart of knowing that, but I'll tell you that I think what you're onto this is the next wave, right? Of how leadership is done, right? And as we evolve, right? It used to be the days, like I grew up in the days of, Bobby Knight throwing the chairs at his players, right? Like that's how you motivate people, right? And like, or I got to just tell it like it is, right? I just got to say, hey, Gino, man, this sucks, right? Because if you and I talk around it, then you're not going to think there's any change. And like, but what we've learned now is that, like, well, when I say, Gino, this sucks, you're no longer listening to me. All you're saying is, man, that guy's a jerk. Yeah. I got to start looking for another job. Like, he doesn't understand me, right? Instead of like talking about the issue. And I think this next wave is thinking of like, well, and also the role of a leader, right? Of like, it's really hard. So I've struggled because in the way of, I got to where I've got because I've been the go-to person. Yeah. I'm the one delivering, right? And so then I'm elevated into a leadership role. And it's tough to be like, well, I'm no longer the person that's supposed to deliver. I'm not the one who's supposed to come up with the answer. My job is to take care of the people who are supposed to come up with those answers. And that's tough, right? But figuring out that's my role. Their role is something else. And I think that's the next wave of really making sure that, like, us leaders, our job is to just take care of the people, right? And then I think our struggle is like, what does that mean? Okay, that maybe means professional development. Maybe that means, helping them see around corners. What's the next level of thinking, of training that you need to get? Like, how do we protect them from all the non-kind leaders out there? Right.
And it's going to take investment, right? It's going to be in the corporate world, definitely investing in training and consistent, sharing what can be done and what you need to do. And then in the government, it's more than just the leadership training, because it's going to be based on the culture as well. It's a combination of how leadership impact the culture and navigating through that, because there's going to be different things. You're going to see different ecosystems, different cultures, and different things that are going to, but how do you adapt, right? And I don't have all the answers just yet, right? Or I don't even know if I will ever, but we're trying. We're putting one step forward and creating this momentum and awareness for others to really take on, and hopefully they can take a piece of this conversation. And
I think so. Well, listen, what I would love is, like, maybe kind of like how people have book groups. I think there should be like a group around these podcasts, right? Like when a podcast launches, maybe getting a group of people from the private sector, people from the government sector, and just having like discussions about it, right? Of like, what does this mean to you? How does this reflect? Hey, call BS on something that you didn't think, right? Of like, but I think having people having those conversations would be very valuable.
I like that. That's great. I'm going to have to write that down for sure.
Well, when you're ready to launch it, I'll bring all the people from the government.
I appreciate it. We need that. So a few more questions as we're kind of wrapping up here. So what does success as a leader mean to you?
That's great, right? So I don't know if I could come up with, part of my challenge is I'm all over the map on everything, right? Like we were talking about, I do stuff in academia, private sector, nonprofit. So I'm all over. So I think success is kind of multifold. As I've gotten older, I derive a lot of my success from the people on my team, right? So seeing their successes is really, really valuable, right? Having somebody who, I'll tell you a great example. So I had in one of my overseas posts in the Middle East, I had a scheduler who was just, one of those people you meet, you start working with, and you're like, oh man, you need to be president of the United States one day. I mean, this woman was phenomenal. Like she was, but she was, I don't want to say just a scheduler, but that was her role. And that's what she, had aspired to be. And I just saw in her, I was like, no, you got to be doing a lot more. Like, you really can achieve a ton. And investing in her, talking to her, pumping her up, right? Like she's now at GS15. So in the government, that's a pretty senior level position at GAO. Like, I mean, it's amazing to see somebody like grow like that. And so I think success, for a leader, right, is like, what are their people doing?
And seeing the people around you succeed, right? Rising together.
Totally.
In a way, right?
Right.
Beautiful.
That, and I think also like finding a mission, I think is really important, right? Of like defining a mission for your team and making sure they achieve that mission, right? So for me, that's, like some peace deal, it's solving some global problem, right? For some, for a private sector company, maybe it's like identifying a commercial problem and figuring out how to solve that.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you for sharing on that.
Yeah, of course.
The other question I love to ask all the time is, if you could have coffee with anyone alive or from the past, who would it be and why?
Okay, so since I've been listening to your podcast, I've been like, I can't top the suggestions people have given. So I've thought about this, and what I want to find, who I want to talk to, are like leaders who are not known for kindness. So great leaders, right? So like Andy Grove of Intel or Steve Jobs of Apple, who again are not known for kindness, and really being like, did you think you were kind? Right. I'd wonder from their perspective, and especially now, if they looked back now, being like, what could they have achieved if they were kinder? What could they have achieved? And try to get really in their head of like, what would you do differently? I bet it would be a really interesting conversation.
That's a good one. That's a great perspective, Danny. I didn't think about that. Like really talking to Steve Jobs, and it was like, if you would have done something different, what would it have been? I love that. Yeah, I would have loved to be part of that too.
I mean, when you think about like all that Apple achieved, imagine if they also had kind leaders. Or listen, maybe Steve Jobs would tell us like, listen, you guys know about all these unkind things I've done, right? That gets characterized as unkind. What you don't know is here's these 20,000 other things that I've done. It'd be really interesting to know.
Yeah.
I have to believe that there's a lot of kindness he probably displayed to get his company to where it is.
Absolutely. I think there's got to be a level of that, or empathy or understanding. I know he was very grinder as you can get, right? From like, we need this executed, we need it now type of thing. But we'll never know, but good to kind of, so great story there. So, well, I appreciate, you being here. I would imagine listeners can connect with you via LinkedIn or
that'd be perfect. Anytime. That'd be great.
Just to follow up. And then, so, it's always kind of good to connect with others, and definitely we'll keep you in mind as we continue to expand and grow here, and we have some other things. But are there any final thoughts on your end?
No, listen, I appreciate being part of these conversations. I think they're really important. So whatever you do, if you end up having book groups, if you end up doing some kind of training projects, I'd love to be involved and have our teams involved any way we can, because this is, awesome. I think this is crucial for our future.
Thank you very much, Danny. I appreciate it. So thank you for joining us today. And I definitely want to thank our audience for listening, and always welcome feedback, right? How can we, there's certain questions people may want me to ask, and I like the structure that we have, but I'm open for suggestions, right? And then if you have any guests that you guys would like me to be part of, or if you have any Danny in your mind, just let me know as well. So
for sure.
Awesome. Well, with that, thank you everybody for participating, and be kind, bring value, rise together. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Awesome.